Hello and welcome to the Chronological Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 242, Don't Blame Classical Music, with Justin Peterson. Next up on the Vocal Pedagogy series on the podcast, links in the show notes to the whole series, Justin Peterson is a voice teacher with some very interesting and thought-provoking things to say about how we teach voice and some very useful ideas about the instruction itself. Justin Peterson shares his journey as a singer and voice teacher, discussing the importance of rejecting labels when we describe ourselves as musicians, the misconceptions surrounding classical singing, and the objective standards that define it. He emphasizes the need for a broader understanding of classical music and the dangers of chronological snobbery, as he calls it, namely the fashionable criticism of past traditions and the lionizing of the present. The discussion also touches on the significance of effective pedagogy and the challenges faced by voice teachers in conveying their knowledge to students. The language barrier, so to speak. He critiques the reliance on trendiness in teaching, the limitations of traditional conservatory models, and the myths surrounding vocal instruction, one of many that people oftentimes use. For example, sing with an open throat. So in this episode, you're definitely going to be challenged. Your preconceived notions are going to be in the balance. So I hope, of course, that you tune in and listen all the way to the end. Ideas expressed then over on the Chronological Facebook page, or you can go onto the Substack and leave comments there in a little bit less algorithm-driven environment. And of course, don't forget to get t-shirts just like this one if you're watching on YouTube, your thank you for your mistake, or other Chronological merch at chronological.com/shop. Your music program or event deserves a platform that does it all, without the extra costs. With Ludus, you get seamless ticketing, built-in marketing, powerful fundraising, and volunteer management, where volunteers can sign up, schedule shifts, and track hours with ease. Need to sell merchandise and concessions in person? Ludus Retail lets you log sales by each group, track inventory, keep everything organized. Hosting music lessons or theater camps? They have a classes feature, which makes registration and student tracking effortless. And it's free for your organization. Thousands of programs already trust Ludus because they help you focus on what matters most, the performance. Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. I would like to encourage you to become a paid subscriber to this show. That's not required, but if you want me to keep doing it forever, I'm going to have those people subscribed. You can start at $3 a month, all the way up to $20 a month. And on Patreon, there's a list of different levels with different perks, so to speak. Or on Substack, you can simply upgrade your free subscription there to a paid subscription. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Venture Studios, Brian Long, Angie Schilling, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, and Steve and Kathy Kakacek. All right, everybody. I am here with Justin Peterson. And Justin is a singer, a voice teacher. I'll let him tell us more about that. But also a blogger with a really awesome blog that is called, let's see if I can get this name right, A Voice Teacher's Chrestomathy. Did I say that right?
That's right. That's right.
So, but I'm too curious. What the heck is a chrestomathy? I want to know about that before I even know about you.
So the chrestomathy is basically, it was a book that was used to learn foreign languages. So as you were learning, like say Spanish or French or Italian, you would begin to collect all of the linguistic things that you were learning in one centralized place. And I thought, as a person who's very interested in sort of pulling all the pieces of pedagogical knowledge together, I thought, what a perfect name for this, because it's exactly what I'm passionate about, what I love doing, which is connecting dots and finding things together as I learned how to be a better voice teacher.
I see.
So that's the purpose of it. Yeah.
Okay. I see. All right. So now please tell us about you. Who are you? Where do you come from? What do you do every day?
Wow. Well, let's see. I come from I was born in Independence, Missouri, and I grew up south of Kansas City in a small little rural community called Peculiar, Missouri. Grew up on a farm. My grandmother was a music teacher in the Kansas City School District for about 35 years. She was actually the head of the vocal music coordination for all of the Kansas City public schools. So she had a big hand in that. My mother had a beautiful alto voice, and I think I just got it by genetics. I got singing by genetics and did a lot of singing in high school. My first sort of desire as a 10-year-old was to go to Nashville and be a Nashville country singer. That was my goal. Closer to home. Nashville is not too far from Kansas City. So, and then as I got older, I started to take voice lessons, and teachers sort of, I don't want to say pushed me into classical. They just sort of opened that world up to me. And it was something that I didn't know. And I just kind of found myself falling in love with it. And then I went to college and got my bachelor's degree in voice performance. And then I went into a graduate program and got my master's degree in opera there. And that kind of brings me through my sort of young life. And then I had the unfortunate experience of having my voice kind of wonk out on me a little bit post-graduation and wasn't able to sort of sing in the same way I was singing, and things just didn't work very well. So it sort of set me on my Joseph Campbell hero's journey to try and figure out what was going on with me and get my voice back. And it just has been sort of that long study and wanting to know things from a scientific perspective, wanting to know things from a historical perspective, and then basically just sharing what I've learned with other people. And that's kind of been the mission of my life these past 10 or 15 years, has just been to share the information.
That's awesome. That is very cool. Now, do you do, I know I can see you've got a pretty fancy little setup here, very similar to mine. Do you do a lot of online lessons too?
I do. One of the other things I do that I really love doing is I help high school students who want to go to college for musical theater. I help them prepare their auditions. I help find their music, select their music, cut their music for a pianist, teach them how to interact with musicians in the room when they go in for their auditions, and just sort of, cheerlead them through that process of their senior year. So a lot of that involves me being online because not all the students are local here to where I live now in Boston, but are spread out throughout the entire United States.
Right. Now, do you, and this is always a question I'm curious for musicians, that do you have a genre-based musical identity? You just said you do some coaching of musical theater. Do you think of yourself as a musical theater singer? Do you think of yourself as a classical singer? Do you reject the label? Like, how do you approach that?
I kind of don't like labels. I think maybe it's because I'm a 90s kid. We were always about rejecting the labels. So I like to say singer. I like to say singer. A singer who, like even my dad, God bless him, he'll say, "Oh, my son's an opera singer." I'm like, "Dad, can you just say singer? Can you just say singer?" Because I don't like boxes. I don't like to put myself in a box. I think it limits creativity. I think it limits imagination, vocally speaking. And yeah, I guess I was lucky. I grew up in a home where there was a lot of different types of music being played. So it wasn't like all the eggs were in one basket when it came to musical expression. We listened to all number of things. Country music was huge, obviously, because of my Nashville predilections, but also rhythm and blues. And my dad would listen to the Fish Fry on Friday and Saturday nights, which was all just blues music. And we would beg him to turn it off, so he didn't like it. We listened to everything. The doo-wop music of the 50s and 60s. I grew up on my parents' high school music. I grew up on the more like Burt Bacharach stuff of Dionne Warwick and that kind of music. And my mother loved West Side Story, so there were some musicals that were kind of peppered in throughout that. So it was a really, really wide musical panoply of stuff that I was listening to. So I like to say I wasn't born a snob. I had to learn how to be that. So and now I kind of reject that. I'm kind of like, I don't like, musical snobbishness to me is just kind of a big turnoff. Because I just think, we should be able to identify what's good in music, no matter what kind of music it is. So,
right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Now, one of the reasons that I reached out to you to ask you to come and have this conversation is because I came across one of your blogs. I found that it's very, very interesting. My Choralosophy community blog on Substack. I feel like every other day I'm getting a new subscriber, and it's people who come from your blog.
Well, same.
So, yeah, it's interesting.
We're cross-pollinating.
That's right. That's right. And I came across this one, which I found really fascinating, partly because it touches on a topic that is also one of my pet peeves. And I'm just going to read the name of the blog and then we'll kind of jump in. And the blog was called "Bad Teachers Do Not Equal a Bad Genre, Why Classical Singing Deserves Better." And then your intro statement before the blog starts is, "There's a growing trend in the voice teaching community to dismiss classical training as outdated rigid, and even harmful. And while it's true that many singers have had frustrating experiences with classical voice teachers, we need to stop taking those bad experiences and making them universal. Classical singing isn't the problem. Bad teaching is. Okay, shots are fired already, right? Before the blog has even started. Jump in and tell us what inspired you to create this piece before we talk too much about the points.
I think I warily look at the conversations that occur often in the sphere of voice teaching. And I have noticed over the past 10 years or so an increasing chauvinism when it comes to classical music and sort of rejecting it and, kind of a snide superiority that comes from people, denying its validity or its value to musical education. And I guess that's where it came from. And what I see in most of the people who have made these comments, they have themselves been the victim of very bad teaching. And so rather than sourcing their resentments on an individual who has caused them a particular agony, they extrapolate that out to an entire genre of music, which has done nothing to them, right? So that's sort of the genesis of that particular article that I wrote. And we have to be very careful that we don't throw babies out with bathwater.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I actually connected that idea before I read your piece. I did an episode a while back, maybe 6 months ago, with a person named Babatunde, who is on TikTok as Babatunde Hip Hopera. And he does like hip hop and opera mixed together as like a fusion. And it's fascinating. But we had a similar conversation about this idea, but instead of talking about how there are legitimate concerns that people have had with voice teachers, we talked about how there are legitimate beefs that a person could have with like even just the exclusionary economic structure of classical music. If you go back to like the Gilded Age and you're talking about like who gets to go to the opera in New York City in 1885, it's like, the wealthiest 0.2% of people could ever even dream of even showing up there.
Correct.
But I think that even fits into the same category of, is that the music's fault? Well, no. And it's probably not even the musician's fault. They're just, they're the ones that are working for a living, right? This is a bigger, broader societal structure that we are then mapping onto blaming classical music for the societal problem. Thoughts?
Correct. Well, I think that's right. And also, I think that, interestingly, these conversations tend to be centered in the vocal world and not so much in the pianistic world or any other internal instrumental world. In other words, if a pianist in any town in America goes to take piano lessons with a teacher, eventually there's going to be an interaction and an intersection with working on things like Debussy, Liszt, Bach, Schubert, Schumann, name your favorite pianist composer, because the repertoire itself is the tool by which the skills are acquired for masterly musicianship and to understand compositions. It seems that the voice community wants to disabuse themselves of this richly accumulated tradition. For what, I don't know, but there are still skills. Why? I like to say this. In what other instrument can an instrumentalist say, I don't need to sing scales. I don't need to play scales. I don't need to learn dynamic contrast on my instrument, and then say that that's a point of pride. Well, I can't play scales, and it's okay because that's just my instrument. It wouldn't fly. It wouldn't fly in any conservatory in any style of music, by the way. Mm-hmm. Any style of music. Oh, I can't do that. Well, it's okay. No big deal. I mean, I think the thing about classical music is, good, bad, or indifferent, it is a confrontation with the self in a way that can be very traumatic, in a way, because it makes you look at yourself and say, wow, I can't do that. I'm not able to do this. This is beyond me. And I think there can be two reactions. There can be a reaction of revulsion and rejection and frustration, or there can be an aspirational, exciting attitude, which is, I can't wait to learn this. I'm so excited. I know as a young singer, I would dream about things that I could potentially do one day with my voice that I wasn't able to do. So it had a very aspirational quality to it. So I agree with you. But I think that the standards that classical music lies down are things like, can you sing a wide range? Can you change the volume of your voice? Do your vowels come out in an undistorted way? Are you able to have an unobtrusive vibrato rate? Are you able to do what you want with your voice most of the time? Does the voice hold up under normal stresses for a considerable amount of time? These are standards of music. And also, they're objective. They're not subjective. The artistic realm will say, well, I don't like that sound, or that isn't, that's not my preference. Well, a person as a voice educator, I don't give two bits about aesthetics in terms of the function of the voice. You're either singing a vowel correctly or you're not, or you have range or you don't. These are objective metrics that we can use to look at the voice and be completely dispassionate about it. There doesn't need to be a poisoning of aesthetics, because as you know as well as I do, even in particular genres of music, there will be people that don't agree with each other. You know, in jazz or pop or any genre, they'll say, I hate that singer. Or some say, I love that singer. Well, that's all, that's subjective taste.
Yeah.
So I always try to put my pedagogical framework within objective reality. What is real? What is true?
Yeah, I wonder how you feel about this distinction. I feel like some of this topic also gets into the weeds with people because of a lack of clarity with what is meant by classical when we say the word.
Correct.
The C word.
Correct.
Meaning that in different contexts, of course, in some contexts, we are talking about very narrow range of like music written after 1750 by Europeans and prior to 1850 and, whatever else you want to say. And then there is a broader context for that word that frequently gets used where I'm never quite sure what somebody means by classical, because in the modern context, like if I'm teaching a soprano in Ned Rorem's song, a lot of people would call that classical, but of course Ned Rorem's not Mozart, and it's a different style of music, and it's a different way of writing and a different framework artistically and aesthetically, but yet a lot of people would call them both classical. So I wonder if all those objective categories that you just listed, there's a good list, by the way, I wonder if those sometimes erroneously get lumped in with classical time period, classical music in a way that could just be like, we could be thinking of it just as singing.
Right.
Like
right.
Talking about singing.
Exactly. Well, and there is a great story, and this is I believe in the 1850s, and they were going to put on a concert of what they considered in the 1850s to be classical music, right?
Uh-huh.
So they were doing music from 20 years previous. And they did this in Florence, Italy. I was going to say Lawrence. I'm like, no, wrong sound. And the concert could not go on because the singers who were hired to perform the music had no understanding of the stylistic demands of the music, so they couldn't perform it. So in a 40-year period of time, the stylistic change was so great that the singers didn't know how to perform it. Modern music in 1830 was modern music. Modern music in 1906 was modern music. Even the classical musical theater realm, when we say legit singing, which some people balk at the term, right? But I would say, listen to how the musical singing of the American musical theater has changed since its inception in 1920. If you go back and you hear how people sang in the 1920s and 30s, you would be struck by what would sound to be a very quote-unquote classical approach to singing. It was the only game in town for a long time. But you're right. When we say a classically trained actor, what does that mean? What is a classically trained actor? How does that get defined? Does that mean they perform Shakespeare?
Yes. Yeah, I don't mean, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
There's a third way that the term classical gets used, and you just touched on it, which is there is also the term classical education,
right,
which refers to a way of teaching.
Right.
A way of teaching, a particular philosophical approach to the teaching. You could apply all these things to dance as well. You've got a ballet, which is a classical type of dance, but then there are ways that ballet was taught historically that can also be mapped onto other forms of dance. It happens there too in all these art forms. And so essentially, the way I think of it, people might disagree with this, or you might, but if I say that I'm classically trained as a singer, as an actor, as a dancer, there's probably other things. Artists, visual artists, painters probably have a similar kind of thing where it probably means that I was taught a certain sequence of skills in a certain way, progressively, like that I had to build skills over time, understanding as a singer, understanding how my voice works, what the body parts are, how they interact, some aspect of science mixed in with the art, or else it probably isn't going to be called classical training. That does not mean that I only sang Mozart. Thoughts?
Right. And I would say what's really vexing about this sort of culture is that even amongst 12 classical voice teachers, you will get 11 opinions.
I don't know if you've heard about it. If you haven't heard about it, you've got to go try 3-Minute Theory. You can go to 3minutetheory.com and you can check it out now when you decide to get this comprehensive system of pre-made materials for your music theory related concepts. You just go into that account and pull out tons of ready-made material. I don't think you'll be even able to teach all of it in 1 year. It's so much stuff that you can tailor make and custom make to your needs. So go check it out, and of course use the Chorolosophy discount code when you sign up to get a 15% discount on your membership.
Right? They themselves will not agree about what does that mean? What is classical training? And is there consensus? And that's the other thing that's so tricky when it comes to vocal pedagogy, is that there is not some kind of a uniform pedagogical consensus about how the thing is to be done. We may agree on a result, but we cannot agree on the means whereby we get to that result. And that is what's fostered argumentation in the classical music world since the 1700s in writing. People, no, it's not this way. You have to do it that way. No. All of that conversation, though, is pedagogical, believe it or not. It's like the best way of learning to do something. So it's amazing that even within the genre itself, there is not some tacit agreement on what classical is. Because again, Gesualdo is classical music, but Gesualdo is not Wagner, right? They're not the same animal. It's not the same thing any more than Dear Evan Hansen is South Pacific. They're not the same.
Yeah,
they're not the same.
right.
They're
Yeah.
not the same, right? But they are both musical theater, right? South Pacific and Dear Evan Hansen are both musical theater.
Yeah.
So
Which
I'm all about let's broaden the things rather than narrow them.
is Pirates of Penzance classical or is it musical theater?
Right. Or Magic Flute even. I mean, Mozart's Magic Flute is not even considered an opera. It was called a Singspiel at its time, right? It was a Mozart's opera, I say opera, I meant Singspiel. Magic Flute is a proto-musical. There's dialogue and there's singing. It's exactly what we would consider today to be a musical.
Yeah.
So
yeah, of course. And I think that's part of this is a bigger issue that we are discussing, which is trying to look at all of history through the goggles of living in our modern time. We almost can't wrap our mind around the idea that there is no, that the categories that we're talking about don't even really exist. Like if you lived them at the time, then they didn't exist. We're trying to put concepts in our current time on history in a way that doesn't really map very well onto reality.
correct.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you were a singer in the 1600s, 1700s, you had maybe 3 styles to master. You had the stage, the theatrical style to master. You had the more concert, smaller venue style to master. And then you had the religious church style to master. Today's music is not that. We have, there's a great website that I love. I don't know if you've ever been on it. It's called Every Noise. It's literally the name of the website, Every Noise. And if you scroll down through it, it's literally the recorded legacy of music in the human experience from all genres of the world. And to see all the different genres of music, it's a staggering website. And I love it. I always share it with my students in the first lesson. And I say, here's your listening homework.
Yeah.
Go home and listen to this, and to see what is available today. We've had a broadening of choices today. The opera is no longer the only game in town anymore. And I think diversification in that regard is great. But you're right. We cannot live in chronological snobbery, right? This is a term that was coined by C.S. Lewis. The idea that the time that we live in now is the best time and everything that comes from us in the past is useless and has no value. There's nothing good to be learned from anything in the past. We are the best of all possible worlds. It is a kind of a snobbery. It is.
Yes.
And it affects how we think.
It ignores that type of snobbery is very fashionable, but it always has been, which also reveals one of that kind of internal contradiction that most of those chronological snobs don't realize, which is that someone 100 years from now will look at us like troglodytes.
Correct.
Number one. And number two, we don't know what life was even like back then. Like we think we do because we studied, I studied history.
Right.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
You read something that a person wrote who also probably wasn't there.
Right.
You think that, heck, humans can only see 1.5% of the light that's in the room with us right now. And we can only see half or hear 0.5% of the noise. Yet we think we know what it was like to live in 1825.
Right.
So that's wild to me.
It is wild to me. Well, it is, yeah, and it's interesting too because a couple weeks ago I also wrote a little bit about transactional analysis in the studio, which was a frame of egoic states of being that was sort of codified by Eric Berne, who was I believe, a disciple of Freud. And basically, we have three personality types within us, like three ego states: a parent ego state, which separates itself into a nurturing parent and a critical parent; a child, which is a free child and an adapted child; and then in the adult, which kind of mitigates everything in the middle. The snobbishness I see comes from a critical parent ego state, right? I know better. I know better. That is a parental egoic response. I'm more interested in creativity, which is the child's response, the playful response of the child, mitigated by the adult, who is the curiosity of, how does this work? I want to know how that works. What happens if I do this? Could we explore more of that? The critical parent has its place, but I think we have been overtaken by hall monitor critical parents who want to tell us what we should like, what we shouldn't like, what's good, what's not good, and really, in essence, kind of destroys all individuality out of people to like what they like.
But
And that
Justin,
comes,
those people are experts.
well, it's interesting you say that because I see a lot of appeal to authority, right? This happens a lot.
right.
The fallacy of the appeal to authority. This happens in the classical music world where potentially, well, not potentially, will happen where classical singers who have had some success on the stage will then come back into a classroom and teach singers how to sing. And the singers will adopt the appeal to authority because, well, clearly this person knows pedagogy, they know voice training, they know singing because they have a career as a singer. And nothing could be further from the truth. There is a great quote in Richard Miller's book where he talks about sailors who know how to tie lots of different kinds of knots. And they're expert at tying knots on ships, but they couldn't tell you how to tie knots. They would be completely at a loss for how to do this. But this happens a lot where there's expertise, high levels of, for example, mathematicians who have forgotten what it's like to not know something. The teacher, right, the excellent teacher should never forget what it feels like to not know how to do something. And for this reason, it's one of the reasons I'm very grateful that I lost my voice in adulthood, because I had to know nothing again. I had to take on a beginner's mind and not be able to do something. And I think it made me a much more powerful voice teacher because I remembered the idea of what it means and feels like psychologically, physically, to not be able to do something.
Right. Yeah.
And
wow.
a singer will look at you agog like, why can't you just do this? I'm doing it. What's your problem? Why can't you just do this? That is bad pedagogy.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I had a voice teacher in college that was a very successful opera singer by the time he was 22 and had high C's and had no idea how he was doing it. And then by the time he was a voice teacher for me, he would just bust out the high C and say, do it like this.
Right.
And I would be like, if I could do it like that, I would be in New York and not here in Kansas City. I need you to explain to me how to do it. And he didn't have the language to, because he had the job essentially because he was a really good singer.
Right. And that happens. And then those singers, and God bless them, but they come in and then they if they're still performing, they may not be present for the education of the student. So the student is missing vital education for very long swaths of time, and that might be pawned off to a graduate teaching associate or someone like that in a school. But again, you're going to make me political.
That happens in conducting too.
Oh my goodness! And then it's a money draw, right? So if I'm a young singer, I'm 17 years old, and I see, famous soprano so and so is teaching at this university. Suddenly, me as a student, again with the appeal to authority fallacy, thinks she's going to be an amazing teacher because she had an international global career. Mm-hmm. And then you go there and then she starts talking about, spinning the golden wheel in front of your face, or, sing purple, or, I need you to, my favorite is that you need a deeper connection to your breath. And I always laugh at that. And or they say you're not connected to your breath, which is always one of my favorites, because it's like, well, they're still pink and they're upright. So I think they're doing okay. But yeah, or they'll proffer really what is folk pedagogy. I don't know if you've ever studied theology, but theology is very interesting because they talk about folk theology. At one end, you have like the austere, high accumulated traditional literature of for example, the Catholic Church. And then you have on the other end, folk theology, which sort of rejects all of that and then just sort of lives in the you just need to open your throat, just open your throat up. It's based on, just folky wisdom. And a lot of pedagogy can be folk pedagogy instead of actual And this is why I wrote that article about the open throat, because in 1917, you have David Alva Clippinger basically saying, this is propaganda. People that are saying open your throat are spreading propaganda. And I think even in the quote that I shared, he said there's a special place in hell for people like that say that. So,
wow.
there, but yeah, the draw of a name is huge for a school because it then becomes a recruitment tool for a program.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually do want to get to some of those pedagogical specifics here in just a little bit. But before we do, I want to go back into your first blog and talk about the conservatory model for a second, because that was one of the sections in the blog. Now, I went to a conservatory.
Yes.
So that part perked me up just a little bit. So one of the things it says, and I'll give a little bit of a teaser here and then let you talk more about it. It says, for a long time, if you trained as a classical singer, there was really only one expected outcome: opera or concert singing, or, I think we know what you mean there. But that made sense in the past. Classical institutions were built around producing the next generation of opera and art song performers, but the vocal world has changed. And so I get the impression that you're trying to point out, again, that it's not the genre and the composers and the type of music itself that is stuck in a box. It's the institution itself and what it prioritizes.
Yes.
And we shouldn't blame the music for that.
No.
Is that a good summary?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the most wonderful thing to do for the young singer in a conservatory is to expose them to as great an amount of music as they can be exposed to, and allow them to be, the fashionable word today is cross-trained, right? To be able to flex musically to different styles of expression so that they are able to have a broader musical life in outside of just one genre. No one would put all of their money in one stock. So why should we do that with music? We should have a diversity of musical styles that are taught in colleges, classical music included. And it should be all, very diverse. Okay, now let's try this, and then we're going to do this. Or you have multiple people who have different strengths in programs that can say, okay, this person does more jazz, this person does more pop style. But you would have exposure to those things. And then ultimately, as with all art, it becomes the purview of the artist to decide which way they'd like to go. Which direction would I like to go in? What do I feel the most affinity for as a person? The thing we don't talk about at all, and we need to, is artistic temperament. That factors into a lot of the kinds of music that people like to sing. It's your personality. It is in your personality. If you ever I hung out with a lot of country people. They are very salt of the earth. And they'll sit around and smoke and drink beer and very informal. That's a culture. That's a culture. That's a musical culture. Classical music has its own. Jazz has its own. All of these genres of music are a mindset. I love to say that music style is a mindset, and it does attract certain temperaments into it. So temperament, I think, has to be an important part of the pedagogical discussion. If you have a very kind of sanguine, student, or maybe more withdrawn, maybe they're going to find real solace in more introspective music, and that's where they really feel affinity for. Well, let's get them into that kind of a style of music and let them express themselves, because that is really what music is about, self-expression. So, but again, I'm a person who very much believes in the open the panoply of the repertoire. Let students try on all different types of musical wardrobe. See what they like. Do you like this? Does this fit you? What do you feel about this music? Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I consider myself to be the, salad bar of music. I want kids to come in and I want them to try the radishes, try the jalapeno peppers, try the frisee salad. Take everything in and try it and see what you like. And maybe you won't like it at first blush, but it may grow on you. It may grow on you, and you might find you love it. And all of that enriches your life anyway. All of that.
Us as teachers, we don't get to decide that for the student ultimately. What kind of music lights their fire, so to speak, is not up to us.
No.
And so to try to, I guess, prime the pump ahead of time for a certain outcome for the student is where a lot of these ethical lines get crossed. I think that the distinction that you are making is a really important one, and so I want to highlight it before we move on to the next topic, which is that you're talking about this in the context of student musicians.
Yes.
So I make a distinction that's an important one, I think, which is that there is nothing wrong with an adult musician who's gone through a certain amount of training to say, you know what, I am an opera singer. That's all I want to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to be trained at a school, I think in a school setting, we do have a little bit more of an obligation. And I think the younger it goes, the more general it should be. That's just my personal philosophy. Like the older a person gets, the the more specialized we should become, or can become, I should say. Should is the wrong word, but it's okay. So in the choir world, for example, we're told all the time about how diverse our programs need to be. And I think that is good in a student context, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong with being an ensemble of 9 adults that specialize in music from France in 1722.
Right. I agree.
Like if that is the kind of music you want to be a specialist in, you shouldn't be criticized for that. But at the same time, I shouldn't be a member of that group and then go teach a high school choir somewhere and then only give my students music from France in 1722.
Correct. And that is,
you know what I mean?
I absolutely do. And, I did some research on this several years ago about where did music programs come from? In other words, when did the United States of America decide, we should have music programs and we should teach people music? The start of those music programs and those music degrees were not performance-based. They were education-based. Those instructions and those degrees were given to people who were going to go back to their communities and teach their church choirs or teach in school environments. And I think that the education system should remember a little bit of that, because why shouldn't a good, vocally well-trained singer in a school be able to go out after they've graduated and know how to teach children how to sing in the little musical that they're going to do? Because like you said, what if they're doing Mean Girls? You cannot sing Mean Girls in the same way that you would sing La Boheme. Those two ships don't cross. So the education should value these musical styles and show, here's how you work them, because many of us who come out of programs are going to become educators. So we should have a more democratic view of musical styles to give to our students and to meet our students where they are. But also, like I said, I love that you love pizza, but I want you to also have some vegetables. It's like, have some of this too. I think any piano teacher, my most wonderful piano teachers were those teachers who would give me the music that I love to play, but then also sprinkle in the Debussy or sprinkle in the Beethoven and ask me if I stayed at the piano. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because then the practicing was this fully robust thing that included stuff that I liked too. So I was more likely to practice the Debussy if I was also doing, the musical theater tunes that I love to play in high school as well.
Right. No, that's really well said. Okay, let's get into the myth of the open throat. Because I think this is another one of those topics that I like to put in a kind of a category of distinction, which is the difference between what it feels like is happening and what is actually happening.
Yes.
And I coach my son's baseball team, so I'll start with this analogy. One of the most common ones that youth baseball players are told is have a level swing. Okay, but watch video of any Major League Baseball player, nobody has a level swing. There is a loop that happens. From the perspective of the eyeballs of the swinger, it feels level. Because of where they put their head. It's all right. So I'm not going to get into the weeds of baseball, but that's essentially, that's how I read the start of your blog related to the myth of the open throat. There are certain things about the way it feels to a singer when we sing well that make it feel like our throat is opening in some way. But then if you watch it on a CAT scan or whatever, the picture is more complicated.
Yes.
CAT scan's the wrong word. What do I mean?
Like an X-ray.
Thing where the MRI.
Yeah, the MRI. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So now it's your turn. So that was kind of my setup for this. Is that what you're getting at with this? Is that this is a feels like versus reality thing?
Somewhat, but it's also the dichotomy between two opposed viewpoints on voice training. One, which is the school of local control, and the other, which is the school of indirect control. Any of these ideas of localized control vis-a-vis open your throat is an appeal to make a mechanical change in the instrument locally, to do something physically locally to make something happen. But I wanted to backtrack to what you just said. Another analogy that I like to use is discussing olives. If a teacher were to sit around and say, okay, we're going to talk about olives, and I'm going to tell you how the history of olives are, and the olives, and you can substitute open throat for olives here. Okay, the olive does this, and they're brown, and sometimes they're orange, or they're green, sometimes they're black. Some come from Greece, some come from Italy. There's this kind of an olive and that kind of an olive. Meanwhile, the student is sitting the whole time thinking, great, this is great. What does an olive taste like? The student cannot know what the olive tastes like until they have the experience of tasting the olive. And this is where I repeat one of my great quotes that I tell every student. Knowledge is for the mind. Experience is for the body. There's a lot of knowledge swashing around, swirling around all of our feet. Our feet, language, grammar, I can speak it, our feet. And yet at the same time, we're very low on experience. The open throat is an experiential activity, like you were just saying, that often doesn't coincide with reality. The idea that the throat only is as far back as your ears is shocking to some singers, to realize that the throat doesn't go back as far as they think that it does. But local control, vis-a-vis lifting of the soft palate or any of that kind of stuff to kind of make the throat open, this is why I pepper in all of these historical documents, because as early as 1777, Mancini was talking about how the throat needs to have the soft action of the fauces, right? That the back of the throat needs to be able to move. Nothing in the body works better by being held in place. And that includes the singing voice. The throat being held in place does not make the sound better. In fact, it distorts everything. All of the vowels become distorted. There is no communicative skill then in the singing voice. It becomes a tone-making machine, not a verbal communication machine, which is what I believe singing is. If I wanted tone, I'd go to an oboe concert.
That was so good. I want you to say it again. Say the thing again about nothing working better.
Nothing in the body works better by being held in place.
Yeah. And that goes back to my baseball practice too. It's true there too.
Yeah.
We can't be in stasis. We have to be moving.
No. And that includes the throat. The thing I find in people that are holding the throat or attempting to open the throat will have what I call omnivowel. Everything takes on this tonal wash, and the linguistic clarity of what they're saying is gone. So then the audience sitting there, you have to remember, even if we're talking about opera, those audiences sat in those opera houses and they were dark. We didn't have the modern lighting systems that we have today. The only way, an audience could really take in the opera in that time was to hear it. And so if the singer was inaudible, their message was garbled. And of course, now the music nerd in me comes out, because we have to remember that the musica reservata, which was an Italian idea, which was word painting, which occurred in all of the madrigal music, and even in England as Vesta. Well, I don't remember that old madrigal by Vesta or whatever. She's running down the hill, and like all the music is word painting, everything. That word painting was the priority of that schooling. And so if the words are lost, the ability to paint the word is also lost. And this is also very common in many singers who have not considered that the verb and the word should drive the communicative singing act. And so then they don't sing in a way that communicates the message of the song. Everything gets garbled, or it's like ketchup on French fries. Everything just gets smothered with tone. There is no word. It just becomes tonal. And you're just drowning in beautiful tone.
Yeah, I would say the choir world has that problem too, where in an effort to create this thing that we call blend, and I hate that term for this reason, in order to create that aesthetic, we've got singers being taught to force their throat into a shape that then matches, but it matches because it's killed all the clarity between the different vowels. And of course that comes into mutes the overtones so that we all sound the same.
Correct. Yeah,
And
it's like a lawnmower. It's like a lawnmower. It just takes everybody and just equally mows them all down to the same level.
Mm-hmm.
And, in my article, I talked a little bit too about the fact that the downstream effects of this manipulation are precisely what you just said, which is you destroy the formant structure of the vowel. The vowel now, the throat is no longer in the shape that it needs to be in to articulate and resonate the vowel being asked for by the music. And then the relationship between the vibrating vocal cords and the resonance space has now been disrupted. And that disruption in the body seeks for relief. It wants to find relief someplace. And where will it go? The tongue, the jaw, the neck, the breathing. It will seek for a relief of that manipulation in the throat in some other systematic part of the body. It will seek to be replaced or equalized. And so then the singer will have the experience of having tongue problems or breath problems and think, oh, my tongue is really rebellious, or I've got a rebellious tongue. No, you have a stuck throat. And if you keep coming at the issue from the tongue or the jaw, you're merely band-aiding the deeper systemic problem in the voice, which is this malformation of the throat.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I have a little bit of a harebrained theory about it. It's not fully fleshed out, but the phrase that I like to use to describe what you're talking about is that a singer can be dissonant with themselves.
Yes.
Like actually, and I don't mean it in some foo-foo kind of metaphorical way. I mean, like in a very literal way, we hear a pitch and a vowel that we want to sing, but then because of all those things you just described, it comes out and then it's dissonant with our brain, like with what we're
Yes.
hoping to do.
Yes.
And then the result of that is some type of clenching or grasping or holding in stasis to try to force the note to be right. And then, of course, it gets worse.
Yeah. And when this is acoustic law. You can hang your hat on it. It's not like, well, my feelings say, no, it's acoustical law. You can say, if the pitch that you sing, which promulgates a harmonically rich or weak signal into the larynx, meets a vowel shape that is not conducive to picking up any of those harmonics in the vocal cords, you are setting up a tube and a vibrator that are literally fighting with each other.
Yep.
It's an acoustic war going on in the throat. And again, that war seeks relief. It seeks to be freed up. And so when singers finally...
And the hard substance will win.
That's correct.
Like, you know what I mean? Like the muscles will try to fight back. The muscles are soft tissue. They'll try to fight back, but they're going to lose.
And the bigger muscles will win.
Yeah, there you go.
Because if you've ever done, I often describe to my students, I do have a penchant for weightlifting. So if you've ever done, for example, a bench press, laid on a bench to press the weight off of your chest, you will see people whose feet come off the floor, right? If the chest is weak, the legs reflexively rise to protect the internal organs from any kind of danger that might be coming their way. Well, that's a compensatory muscular activation of the body. Anytime a muscle is not being used properly or in its most efficient manner, other compensatory muscles will come to the rescue because this is a survival mechanism. This is a mechanism of that we don't die. This is why these mechanisms are there. You know, if your leg goes wonky, you know, your other muscles are going to compensate to get you up in the tree so you don't die. Yeah. So the same thing happens in your voice.
Injury.
That's right. It's the same thing happens in your voice. So larger muscles will always come in to activate against the small, finer muscles that may not be doing their job. And that's when people say, well, my breathing's weird, or I can't get my breath control under me, or all of those things, which are, again, symptoms of some functional issue that's probably not located in the breath, but in how the actual sound is being turned into tone. In other words, how that breath is being turned into sound. That's the crux of the issue. And this is something I write about a lot in my writing. The earliest writers on voice training did not say anything about breath. It's almost vexing to a modern mind to read because we look at it, we're so systematized. And what I love is that I once took a class on cooking, and the historical cooking, mind you, because, you know, why would I study modern things? If you look at the old cookbooks from the 1600s, from whatever, the 1700s, they're very scant on any kind of method or ways of doing something. The ingredient lists are also kind of like, a little bit of chicken, a little bit of that. I mean, there is no sort of scientific precision with which the modern cookbook today is written. I mean, we have things measured down to like the teaspoon of doing things. And yet in that earlier time of cooking, there was much more creativity, much more figure it out. Also much more was taken on faith, right? So for us to talk about breathing, you know, to a 1700 Italian, they would look at us crossways. They would say like, why are you fixing on this? What they really fixated on was, again, vowels. And this is a thing that comes up over and over in their writing, that the clarity of the vowel 9 times out of 10 did a lot of the job for you of all the other things that needed to happen in the vocal technique. So that if the vowel and the vibrator, vocal folds, were in agreement, that was the sync up that happened. And we know that's true because when you get the sync up between the vocal folds and the vibrator, then you get the overtones in the voice. Yeah. It's like a natural reflex. And then it's like, boop. And that's what they were listening for. They were listening for the natural overtone of the voice throughout the vocal scale. And that's how they made the voices. That's how they built those voices. They didn't talk about breathing. They didn't have to so much because when, again, the vibrator and the vowel are in sync, the breath stream then equalizes its pressure against that sound because then the singer doesn't feel the need to put out hefty volume because the sound is so resonant by its nature. There's no need for great gasping, tanking up of breath to carry the phrase.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in fact, okay, so I'm gonna pull one more concept out of your blog here, and then I'll give you the final word to kind of tie this up, because you've got some really great wisdom here from Ken Bozeman, who was on the
Yes.
show and did a great episode on practical vocal acoustics. It's actually one I keep going back and listening to because I have so many ideas that work in choir and voice lessons and stuff. But it says here that in our own century, Ken Bozeman lays out a rock solid argument of the anatomic realities of an open throat in his book, Kinesthetic Voice Pedagogy. And I like that you said it puts a final nail in the coffin on the open throat. And basically, I'm going to summarize here, but Ken's point seems to be that all of the muscles that we use, or that we would use theoretically to open the throat, are constricting muscles.
Yes.
They are muscles that are flexing and holding something in stasis, which is why it's a fool's errand to pursue that task. Thoughts?
I
Is that
agree.
fair?
We have three constrictor muscles in our throat: the superior, the middle, and the lower constrictors. To grab onto any of those muscles in the back is to grab the swallowing muscles. That's literally what they are. They're swallowing muscles.
Mhm.
And then the tone becomes, well, people would say throaty or constricted, or they'd say, well, that singer is singing with a closed throat. Well, that's the only thing the throat does, is close. That's all it does. So then what's the opposite of closing? Is the relaxed throat. This is always my drum I beat for the male voice, because men specifically are very prone to sort of over masculinizing the voice by, affecting the back of the throat and pushing the laryngeal position way low. And when you do that, you destroy all of the flexibility of the instrument in terms of scalar work. A 5-tone or an octave scale or a 9-tone scale isn't really possible in that sound. Dynamic contrast isn't possible. So, those back muscles back there, it's the singer's ego. Because singing is not something that we can put our finger on like a clarinet or a piano, it fills us with neuroticism because it's out of the realm of the tangible, of the physical.
Yes.
And these kinds of directives have an egotistical appeal because it gives the singer or the teacher the false impression that something is actually getting done, that we're actually doing something.
And that we have control over it.
Exactly. And then the singer goes off and thinks, oh, I have to do this with my throat now. I want to hear beautiful male voices singing scales, singing mesody, singing beautiful tonal qualities that are free and flexible, that can change on a dime, that have been potentialized. And we've got to get away, I think, from that postured, overcultured, false timbre. We got to get away from it. If you listen to the recordings of all of the great male singers of the early 20th century, to a person, you will hear a very bright male voice, tenors, baritones, basses, and you will also hear linguistic clarity. You'll hear a lot of text from these singers. Even though they were recorded on very rudimentary machines, their words come across time and space to us, and all of their voices have this bright sheen on them. Because, again, I do believe that they were not manipulating their throats. They were not working for a bigger tone. And again, I find this in all the pedagogical texts. Herbert Witherspoon wrote about this in the 20th century. Clippinger wrote about this in the early 1920s. There were people saying, this is not the way. This is not the way to do it. And even the Italians, who began the whole tradition of the Western classical tradition in singing, they were against this as well.
Right? Yeah. That is just so full, jam-packed with wisdom and interesting things for us to chew on. I want people to be able to also go find your blog. So why don't you tell us how to get in touch with you as we sign off today?
Yeah.
How do we find the blog? How do we find you on social media and be able to nerd out with you?
Well, find me on my Substack at justinpeterson.substack.com. My last name is Danish, not Swedish. So people will often spell it Peterson with an O. I am a proud Danish person. So SEN is my last name, Petersen at .substack.com. You can also find me on Instagram, where I do post sometimes some fun images and quotes and things on @Peterson Voice. Again, all E's, Peterson Voice at Instagram.
Awesome. Justin, thank you so much for spending some time with me and commiserating on all these things. This was very, very helpful and useful. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. I hope it was helpful. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.